Well, hello, welcome. We begin a new chapter tonight in the Life Divine. This, the 7th chapter in Book 2, which is the knowledge and the ignorance. If you remember way back to Book 1, the last chapter that we did, I should say the next to the last chapter that we did, was the sevenfold chord of being. Sri Aurobindo had described how the sevenfold manifestation of this supreme being came billowing into existence. First, in what we call Satchit Ananda, the states of the one being, which we call existence, consciousness, delight. Triune, 3 in 1, but expressive of itself through a vast creative consciousness, which in English Sri Aurobindo called the supermind. And then supermind involves itself, restricts itself into the function, the capacity of mind. Mind extends itself, empowers itself in the vast power of life, prana. And prana itself fashions into formal reality, substantiates the world of matter, anam. So, Sat, Chit, Ananda, Vijnana, Manas, Prana, Anam, the sevenfold chord of being. And we'll see in just a moment that Sri Aurobindo makes strong reference to the significance of 7. There are 7 rishis in the Veda. There are 7 principal stars in the sky, which Vedic seers attend to. And the significance rolls on from there throughout many of the hymns, the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, etc. Now this chapter, the knowledge and the ignorance, was one of the early chapters that continues Sri Aurobindo's earlier work into Book 2. It has still been revised. It doesn't come in as a piece from the Arya just dropped in. He has gone through and revised and added, not as substantially as he did in some chapters, but still it bears the marks of his scrutiny. The first of the mottos that appears at the top, the citations, was the one that was originally in the Arya. The others were added when the Life Divine was brought out as a book. So let's go through these mottos, as we always do, a bit at a time, noting that there are 2 from the Rig Veda and 2 from an Upanishad. So it is both Vedic and Vedantic. Let the knower distinguish the knowledge and the ignorance, chitim and achitim. 2 are there, hidden in the secrecy of the infinite, the knowledge and the ignorance. But perishable is the ignorance, immortal is the knowledge. Another than they is he who rules over both the knowledge and the ignorance. 2 unborn, the knower and one who knows not, the Lord and one who has not mastery. 1 unborn, and in her are the object of enjoyment and the enjoyer. two are joined together. Powers of truth, powers of Maya. They have built the child and given him birth, and they nourish his growth. So all the way back to the Rig Veda, and this first citation is from the fourth mandala, which is indeed an old book in the Rig Veda. There is this capacity of the seer to distinguish between knowledge and ignorance. And then in the citation from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, the white-horsed one is what the word means. He begins, two are there. The there in the Sanskrit is Brahma Pare, the supreme Brahman. Two are there, knowledge and ignorance, hidden in the secrecy, gudhe, of the infinite, anante, ananta. Vidya and avidya. But perishable, ksharam, a word we meet very often in Vedanta afterwards, is the ignorance. It goes, it dies, it moves away. But immortal, amritam, is the knowledge. And other than they is he who rules, ishate, over both knowledge and ignorance. Very interesting phraseology here. So the Supreme is a person who dwells above both knowledge and ignorance. Both are inherently expressions of that infinite person's being. The next citation, two unborn, the knower and one who knows not, the Lord and one who has not mastery, that is, the subject individual who is moving within the circuit of the universe. And then the one, Eka, unborn, the unborn one here is presumably nature, Prakriti. And in her are the object of enjoyment and the enjoyer. So the split in being, where one watches and one is watched, where one knows and another is known, that occurs within the substance of nature. The division does not occur within the spiritual division, in the spiritual nature, because in that essence, no divisibility is possible. Manifestation, making clear what this infinitude holds within it, is possible, but not division. And then finally in this, it says also, at the end of that citation, which Sri Aurobindo did not translate, it says, now the soul, the Atman, is infinite, universal, and active. When one finds out this triad, that is Brahman. And finally, at the end, this last citation from the Veda, two were joined together, powers of truth, Vritta Yini, powers of Maya, Mayini. They have built the child, this is the spiritual person, and given him birth, and they nourish his growth. So this spark of divinity, which is at the core of each individual, has been created, formed, fashioned, and invested with immortal powers which are meant to grow as we experience, explore, and come ultimately to move well within the universe. They nourish his growth. Here, Maya is not a power of trickery, of deceit, of cunning. She is that which measures out the infinite into the finite without dividing the infinite. The powers of truth work in concert with her. They are not adverse to Maya. It is all a complex harmony that is being woven into this sevenfold world, of which 3 members we are currently dealing with: matter, life, and mind. Think of the more that is beyond. Think of that into which we will grow. That is the greater universe, when what is hidden becomes overt through the manifesting power of evolution. So this is where we've set ourselves. I think we can open the chapter now with that background drawn from the Veda and from the Vedanta. Pardon me. In our scrutiny of the 7 principles of existence, it was found that they are one in their essential and fundamental reality. For even if the matter of the most material universe is nothing but a status of being of spirit made an object of sense, envisaged by the spirit's own consciousness as the stuff of its forms, much more must the life force that constitutes itself into form of matter, and the mind consciousness that throws itself out as life, and the supermind that develops mind as one of its powers, be nothing but spirit itself, modified in apparent substance and in dynamism of action, not modified in real essence. All are powers of one power of being, and not other than that all existence, all consciousness, all will, all delight, which is the true truth behind every appearance. And they are not only one in their reality, but also inseparable in the sevenfold variety of their action. They are the 7 colors of the light of the divine consciousness, the 7 rays of the infinite, and by them the Spirit has filled in on the canvas of his self-existence, conceptually extended, woven of the objective warp of space and the subjective woof of time, the myriad wonders of his self-creation, great, simple, symmetrical in its primal laws and vast framings, infinitely curious and intricate in its variety of forms and actions, and the complexities of relation and mutual effect of all upon each, and each upon all. These are the 7 words of the ancient sages. By them have been created, and in the light of their meaning are worked out and have to be interpreted, the developed and developing harmonies of the world we know, and the worlds behind, of which we have only an indirect knowledge. The light, the sound, is one. Their action is sevenfold. So, we come again upon Sri Aurobindo's enthusiastic prose of the teens of the 20th century, when he was writing almost with poetic imagery, drawing upon mythic symbolism and giving voice to this wonder of the universe, manifold in nature, all of it impregnated by the same spiritual presence, differentiated. No division is there. And he continues, but here, there is a world based upon an original inconscience. Here, consciousness has formulated itself in the figure of an ignorance laboring towards knowledge. we have seen that there is no essential reason either in the nature of being itself or in the original character and fundamental relations of its seven principles for this intrusion of ignorance, of discord into the harmony, of darkness into the light, of division and limitation into the self-conscious infinity of the divine creation. For we can conceive, and since we can, the divine can still more conceive, and since there is the conception, there must somewhere be the execution, the creation actual or intended, a universal harmony into which these contrary elements do not enter. So we begin from inconscience. How does it get here? This is his ultimate question. And what he has said here, since there is the conception, there must somewhere be the execution. We hear that echoed in the minds and the voices of modern cosmologists who predicate that if there are X number of possibilities, then there must be that number of actualities. If not in this universe, then in others. The Vedic seers, he writes, were conscious of such a divine self-manifestation and looked on it as the greater world beyond this lesser, a freer and wider plane of consciousness and being, the truth creation of the Creator, which they described as the seat or own home of the truth, as the vast truth, or the truth, the right, the vast, or again, as a truth hidden by a truth, where the Son of Knowledge finishes his journey and unyokes his horses, where the 1,000 rays of consciousness stand together so that there is that one, the supreme form of the divine being. And he gives some citations. Saranam Ratasya, that's from Rig Veda 4, 21:3. Swedama Ratasya, Rig Veda 5, 1, 8, in case you're interested. Ratasya Brahate, Rig Veda 5, 12, 1. And finally, Ritam Satyam Brahat, or Satyam Ritam Brahat, Atharva Veda 12, 1, 1. Up here where he talked about unyoking the horses where the 1,000 rays of consciousness stand together, so is there that one Tad Ekam. You'll find a reference to that in Rig Veda 5:62, 1. It's sometimes important for us to know where these things are situated in the Rig Veda so we can go back and confirm that they are there and then read them in their context. And we gain even more from that study. He continues now. But this world in which we live seemed to them to be a mingled weft in which truth is disfigured by an abundant falsehood. Anritasya Bhure, Rig Veda 7:65. Here, the one light has to be born by its own vast force out of an initial darkness or sea of inconscience. Apraketam Salilam, that's Rig Veda 10:129. This is the famous hymn of creation, Nasadiya Suktam. Immortality and Godhead have to be built up out of an existence which is under the yoke of death, ignorance, weakness, suffering, and limitation. So again, moving, as far as our experience tells us, from darkness towards light. And you see he's used references from the Veda to depict that sometimes the Vedic rishis see the world as constituted from the divine the divine word. The 7 words create the 7 worlds. So it is the vocalization. And that has resonance later in the Tantras. And sometimes he images it as a descent of light into darkness and a climbing of darkness back to light. This idea of apraketam salilam, of this inconscient ocean, lends to that. So rich imagery. How is it that we move from darkness to light, from death to immortality? How did we come from immortality to death? How did we come from light to darkness? What is this passage back and forth? How did we build it? How did we come? What is the framing of it? He continues now. This self-building, they figured as the creation by man in himself of that other world or high-ordered harmony of infinite being, which already exists perfect and eternal in the divine infinite. The lower is for us the first condition of the higher. The darkness is the dense body of the light. The inconscient guards in itself all the concealed superconscient. The powers of the division and falsehood hold from us, but also for us, and to be conquered from them, the riches and substance of the unity and the truth in their cave of subconscience. So they're at the base of things, where we are dwelling now. Remember what was said earlier. We have been invested as children of that great being with inherent powers and immortality, powers of truth, to experience and discover the richnesses which are concealed at the base of the world. And here, in the caves of the subconscious, those treasures lie. And so we have come here with a purpose to unseal them, to reveal them, and to enjoy a world made bright through our effort. This was, in their view, expressed in the highly figured, enigmatic language of the early mystics, the sense and justification of man's actual existence and his conscious or unconscious Godward effort. His conception, so paradoxical at first in a world which seems its very opposite, his aspiration, so impossible to a superficial view in a creature so ephemeral, weak, ignorant, limited, towards a plenitude of immortality, knowledge, power, bliss, a divine and imperishable existence. For, as a matter of fact, while the very keyword of the ideal creation is a plenary self-consciousness and self-possession in the infinite soul and a perfect oneness, the key word of the creation of which we have present experience is the very opposite. It is an original inconscience developing in life into a limited and divided self-consciousness, an original inert subjection to the drive of a blind self-existent force developing in life into a struggle of self-conscious being to possess himself and all things and to establish in the kingdom of this unseeing mechanic force the reign of an enlightened will and knowledge. And because the blind mechanic force, we know now really that it is no such thing, confronts us everywhere, initial, omnipresent, the fundamental law, the great total energy, and because the only enlightened will we know, our own, appears as a subsequent phenomenon, a result of partial, subordinate, circumscribed, sporadic energy, the struggle seems to us, at the very best, a very precarious and doubtful venture. The inconscient to our perceptions is the beginning and the end. The self-conscious soul seems hardly more than a temporary accident, a fragile blossom upon this great, dark, and monstrous Ashwatha tree of the universe. Or if we suppose the soul to be eternal, it appears at least as a foreigner, an alien, and not over well-treated guest in the reign of this vast inconscience. If not an accident in the inconscient darkness, it is perhaps a mistake, a stumble downwards of the superconscient light. And here he's using gently mocking, ironic language and alluding to this old and persistent idea that we are here because of a fall, that we have left the worlds of light and tumbled somehow down into darkness. This is Gnosticism. There is light, here is darkness, and the best thing to do is to quit the universe and go back there. We'll get to that shortly. But is it the real view of things? Is it not a superficial view? Looking at the immediacy of the event, not recognizing its context, not perceiving the purpose behind. So he continues. If this view of things had a complete validity, then only the absolute idealist, sent perhaps out of some higher existence, unable to forget his mission, stung into indomitable enthusiasm by a divine estrus, or sustained in a calm and infinite fortitude by the light and force and voice of the unseen Godhead, could persist under such circumstances in holding up before himself, much more before an incredulous or doubting world, the hope of a full success for the human endeavor. Divine estrus, stung into enthusiasm by divine estrus. And estrus is, in the Greek, a gadfly that drives you crazy by keeping you going. He keeps biting at you, biting at you, biting at you, and you can't sit still. You can't lollygag around. You have to get up and get moving. So, under that divine estrus, and it has application to many aspects of our life, we've got to move. We have to become dynamic. Back to Sri Aurobindo. Actually, for the most part, men either reject it from the beginning or turn away from it eventually after some early enthusiasm as a proved impossibility. The consistent materialist seeks a partial and short-lived power, knowledge, happiness, so much only as the dominant inconscient order of nature will allow to the struggling self-consciousness of man, if he accepts his limitations, obeys her laws, and makes as good a use of them by his enlightened will as their inexorable mechanism will tolerate. Give me my salary and I'll go quietly. The religionist seeks his reign of enlightened will, love a divine being, his kingdom of God, in that other world where they are unalloyed and eternal. The philosophic mystic rejects all as a mental illusion and aspires to self-extinction in some nirvana, or else an immersion in the featureless absolute. If the soul or mind of the illusion-driven individual has dreamed of a divine realization in this ephemeral world of the ignorance, it must in the end recognize its mistake and renounce its vain endeavor. But still, since there are these two sides of existence, the ignorance of nature and the light of the spirit, and since there is behind them the one reality, the reconciliation, or at any rate, the bridging of the gulf forecast in the mystic parables of the Veda, ought to be possible. So he hints, or does he state, that it ought to be achievable to us not to accept these early diminished views of what our place in the universe portends to us. It is, he says, a keen sense of this possibility which has taken different shapes and persisted through the centuries. The perfectibility of man, the perfectibility of society, the Alwar's vision of the descent of Vishnu and the gods upon earth, the reign of the saints, Sadhunam Rajyam, the city of God, the millennium, the new heaven and earth of the apocalypse. This idea about the perfectibility inherent in the human race takes us back to the first chapter, doesn't it? The human aspiration. He continues, but these intuitions have lacked a basis of assured knowledge, and the mind of man has remained swinging between a bright future hope and a gray present certitude. So the ideal is there. A divine kingdom upon earth, a life divine, if you will, but so far has remained unrealized. And what we seem to have in front of us is a gray certitude. And he continues, but the gray certitude is not so certain as it looks. And a divine life evolving or preparing in earth nature need not be a chimera. Chimera, Greek term, means she-goat. It refers to that sort of fantastical creature which is a combination of several creatures. Something that exists only in our imagination and not anywhere, in fact, in flesh. It need not be a chimera. All acceptations of our defeat or our limitation start from the implied or explicit recognition, first, of an essential dualism, and then of an irreconcilable opposition between the dual principles, between the conscient and the inconscient, between heaven and earth, between God and the world, between the limitless one and the limited many, between the knowledge and the ignorance. We have arrived by the train of our reasoning at the conclusion that this need be no more than an error of the sense mind and the logical intellect founded upon a partial experience. This is where we have come to in his analysis to this point. Even blending the newer chapters into it, this is still his sense of things. That we have too provisional a grasp of the world to be able to predicate what it's all about based on our current ignorance. We have seen that there can be and is a perfectly rational basis for the hope of our victory. For the lower term of being in which we now live contains in itself the principle and intention of that which exceeds it, and it is by its own self-exceeding and transformation into that it can find and develop into a complete form its own real essence. Because it is omnipresent, because it is ever-present, because we are evolving these secreted powers which lie within us, mostly unused, but which are now beginning to stir and looking for articulation, there is hope for the future. Not only is there hope, there is certitude in the future. But there is one point in the reasoning which till now we have left somewhat obscure, and it is precisely in this matter of the coexistence of the knowledge and the ignorance. Why are they both here? Here at one and the same time. If we're born from that eternal, if our essence is immortal, then how are we conflicted with mortality? Why are we in a time-bound situation? If we have great knowledge, why have we been plunged into such forgetfulness that we don't remember our origin? Admittedly, we start here from conditions which are the opposite of the ideal divine truth, and all the circumstances of that opposition are founded upon the being's ignorance of himself and of the self of all, outcome of an original cosmic ignorance whose result is self-limitation and the founding of life on division in being, division in consciousness, division in will and force, division in delight, division and limitation in knowledge, power, love with, as consequence, the positive opposite phenomena of egoism, obscuration, incapacity, misuse of knowledge and will, disharmony, weakness, and suffering. We may find that there is a poignant current focus bringing all of this into stark relief at this hour, but this is something that has been part of human perplexity for centuries and centuries. We have found that this ignorance, although shared by matter and life, has its roots in the nature of mind, whose very office it is to measure off, limit, particularize, and thereby divide. But mind also is a universal principle, is one, is Brahman, and therefore it has a tendency to a unifying and universalizing knowledge, as well as to that which marks off and particularizes. The particularizing faculty of mind only becomes ignorance when it separates itself from the higher principles of which it is a power, and acts not only with its characteristic tendency, but also with a tendency to exclude the rest of knowledge, to particularize first and foremost and always, and to leave unity as a vague concept to be approached only afterwards, when particularization is complete, and through the sum of particulars. This exclusiveness is the very soul of ignorance. So here we've come upon it. It is the agency of mind, which gets lost in the field of its own characteristic action, separates itself from that which unifies it to that greater consciousness of which it is an extension, and then gets lost in its own meanderings and cannot found itself upon unity, but can laterally search for it only after trying to sum it all up. First, let me break everything into pieces. Now let me try to reassemble it, and I will construct an eidolon. I will construct a simulacrum. This will be like that. It is not that. There is no need to try to create the real out of broken pieces, because it ever exists. It is, in essence, real, indestructible. So we are lost in the particularities and in the division of thing from thing, of self from object, this from that. This idea, then, is a reference to the involutionary force of mind as it exits the superconscience and moves towards a diminished manifestation, which leads to a resulting universe, which is closeted in darkness, but because it always contains, even in its division, this inherent oneness, that power reasserts itself and begins to climb out. We must then seize hold on this strange power of consciousness, which is the root of our ills, examine the principle of its operation, and detect not only its essential nature and origin, but its power and process of operation and its last end and means of removal. How is it that the ignorance exists? How has any principle or power in the infinite self-awareness been able to put self-knowledge behind it and exclude all but its own characteristic limited action. So how does this action of mind occur? Now, let's go ahead and read the footnote. Buddha refused to consider the metaphysical problem. The process by which our unreal individuality is constructed and a world of suffering maintained in existence and the method of escape from it is all that is of importance. Karma is a fact. The construction of objects, of an individuality not truly existent, is the cause of suffering. To get rid of karma, individuality and suffering must be our one objective. By that elimination, we shall pass into whatever may be free from these things, permanent, real. The way of liberation alone matters. He simply said, it is not edifying to ask such questions about metaphysical origins or is there not a God? Look, you're suffering. Here is the way out of it. Destroy the ignorance, the illusion of self. Destroy the chain of karma. Relax. Settle back into the blowing out of existence, nirvana, where there is no you. And thus we cease from the whole of karma and escape from the universe. So now, forward. Certain thinkers have declared that the problem is insoluble. It is an original mystery, and it is intrinsically incapable of explanation. Only the fact and the process can be stated, or else the question of the nature of the supreme original existence or non-existence is put aside as either unanswerable or unnecessary to answer. One can say that Maya, with its fundamental principle of ignorance or illusion, simply is, and this power of Brahman has the double force of knowledge and ignorance inherently potential in it. All we have to do is to recognize the fact and find a means of escape out of the ignorance, through the ignorance, but into what is beyond both knowledge and ignorance. Pardon me, through the knowledge, but into what is beyond both knowledge and ignorance, by renunciation of life, by recognition of the universal impermanency of things and the vanity of cosmic existence. What he says here regarding Maya would apply to some extent to the practical aspects of the Advaita view of the world as well. But our mind, he says, cannot remain satisfied. The mind of Buddhism itself did not remain satisfied with this evasion at the very root of the whole matter. In the first place, these philosophies, while thus putting aside the root question, do actually make far-reaching assertions that assume not only a certain operation and symptoms, but a certain fundamental nature of the ignorance from which their prescription of remedies proceeds. And it is obvious that without such a radical diagnosis, no prescription of remedies can be anything but an empiric dealing. But if we are to evade the root question, we have no means of judging whether the assertions advanced are correct or the remedies prescribed the right ones, or whether there are not others which, without being so violent, destructively radical, or of the nature of a surgical mutilation or extinction of the patient, may yet bring a more integral and natural cure. Secondly, it is always the business of man, the thinker, to know. So, in refusing to answer the question, but still in offering a solution to it, there is an unstated postulate about the nature of the world. There is a presumption that the world is thus and so, even though there is no metaphysical description of it. So it is not truly agnostic on that point. It has a point of view. It's just not sharing it with you. And as we can see, world riddance devalues the world. So this idea that to find a solution to the problem we must exit the world means that the world is not valuable, is not worthy of our presence in it. This is in stark contrast to the Vedic insights which we read earlier. So let me read that last sentence again. Secondly, it is always the business of man, the thinker, to know. In other words, we can't quit by making no inquiry into the nature of things, into the origin of the universe, into the origin of self in the universe. It is the nature of the restless intelligence in the human, the spirit in the human, to quest forward, to find an answer. He may not be able, by mental means, to know the essentiality of the ignorance or of anything in the universe in the sense of defining it, because the mind can only know things in that sense by their signs, characters, forms, properties, functionings, relations to other things, not in their occult self-being and essence, because the mind has distance from things, doesn't it? It stands apart. It insists on its distinct nature. I am here, that is there. How do I close the distance? How do I know that thing? If I want to know it, I have to assign it a value. I have to call it a name. I have to draw a symbol which represents it. I come to know it through the symbol. So my knowledge of it is indirect. If I had the essential power of consciousness, I wouldn't need my mind. But I am consciousness having become mind. How did this mysterious bit of spiritual jujitsu occur? Well, we'll answer that later. But right now, here is a mental being looking at that and recognizing that it cannot know the essence of this question through the agency of the mind itself. It is not going to be logic and philosophy alone, science, or any of its appurtenances that can answer it. But we can pursue farther and farther, clarify more and more accurately our observation of the phenomenal character and operation of the ignorance until we get the right revealing word, the right indicating sense of the thing, and so come to know it, not by intellect, but by vision and experience of the truth, by realizing the truth in our own being. So we must proceed from thought and logic to the essential experience. And we remember from the last chapter even, that Sri Aurobindo has said we can ride this vehicle of the mind so far with logic and philosophy, but finally we can validate the nature of reality only in a supreme experience that exceeds the limits and the ken of the mind. The mind is a limited agency. How can the limited know the infinite? Well, by becoming silent, by becoming open and transparent, and allowing a greater light to take possession of it, and sharing that greater knowledge with it. But that is not the mind's first move. Instead, it tries to know. The whole process of man's highest intellectual knowledge is through this mental manipulation and discrimination, to the point where the veil is broken and he can see. At the end, spiritual knowledge comes in to help us to become what we see, to enter into the light in which there is no ignorance. To enter into the light in which there is no ignorance. I think that is where we'll put our bookmark this week. I think this chapter we should be able to finish in 3 sessions, and that would mean that we'll draw it to conclusion here in America on the 14th of August, which will be actually the 15th of August, Sri Aurobindo's birthday in India. So that will be a felicitous occasion. And we'll say something about Sri Aurobindo on that night, you can be sure. Tonight, let's close as always we do with, well, I say as always we do, it's become our custom now to read from Savitri. And this section tonight comes from Book 10, the Book of the Double Twilight, Canto 3, the debate of love and death. And this is Savitri speaking. In God concealed, the world began to be. Tardily it travels towards manifest God. Our imperfection towards perfection toils. The body is the chrysalis of the soul. The infinite holds the finite in its arms. Time travels towards revealed eternity. A miracle structure of the eternal mage. Matter its mystery hides from its own eyes. A scripture written out in cryptic signs, an occult document of the all-wonderful's art. All here bears witness to his secret might. In all we feel his presence and his power. A blaze of his sovereign glory is the sun. A glory is the gold and glimmering moon. A glory is his dream of purple sky. A march of his greatness are the wheeling stars. His laughter of beauty breaks out in green trees. His moments of beauty triumph in a flower. The blue seas chant, the rivulet's wandering voice are murmurs falling from the Eternal's harp. This world is God fulfilled in outwardness. His ways challenge our reason and our sense. By blind, brute movements of an ignorant force, by means we slight as small, obscure, or base, a greatness founded upon little things, he has built a world in the unknowing void. His forms he has massed from infinitesimal dust. His marvels are built from insignificant things. If mind is crippled, life untaught and crude, if brutal masks are there and evil acts, they are incidents of his vast and varied plot, his great and dangerous drama's needed steps. He makes with these and all his passion play, a play and yet no play, but the deep scheme of a transcendent wisdom finding ways to meet her Lord in the shadow and the night. Above her is the vigil of the stars. Watched by a solitary infinitude, she embodies in dumb matter the divine, in symbol minds and lives the absolute. A miracle monger, her mechanical craft, matter's machine worked out the laws of thought. Life's engines served the labor of the soul. The mighty mother, her creation wrought, a huge caprice, self-bound by iron laws, and shut God into an enigmatic world. She lulled the omniscient into nescient sleep. Omnipotence on inertia's back she drove, trod perfectly with divine unconscious steps the enormous circle of her wonder works. Immortality assured itself by death. The Eternal's face was seen through drifts of time. His knowledge he disguised as ignorance. His good he sowed in evil's monstrous bed. Made error a door by which truth could enter in, his plant of bliss watered with sorrow's tears. 1,000 aspects point back to the one. A dual nature covered the unique. I think it was apposite our material tonight. Namaste. Jai Ma. Until next week. To our friends on Zoom.